الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد سيدنا وسندنا وحبيبنا وشفيعنا ومولانا صلى الله تبارك وتعالى عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه وأزواجه وذريته وأهل بيته ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. For those of you who were present for my talk yesterday, which was on the topic of unity, unity based upon unity, the gathering of the Muslims, the togetherness of the Muslims based upon tawheed, based upon their aqaid, on their beliefs, rather than their ancillary practices. You will remember that we ended on the idea that our unity it has theoretical bases, it has theoretical foundations, and it's based on the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if two people have to take two separate paths in order to please the same Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that unity, which outwardly looks like separation, that unity that has a theoretical foundation which is common, is a much stronger unity than that unity which is outward conformity. That's a type of totalitarianism. That's a type of group think. You know, that's what people are afraid of. People in America, in the North American continent, which Canada is part of, they value their freedom because they don't want anyone to tell them what to think and what to do. And from one point of view, this is somewhat valid. This is something that Islam appreciates and it upholds. And we ended the talk on the idea that our unity is, because it's for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in everything we do, whenever we gather together, we should make Allah the most important thing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the reason we make the decisions that we make, the reason we come together, and the reason we go apart, rather than the dunya. And this is a very good segue into the next talk. Regarding what? Regarding atheism. It's no secret that the society that we live in is an atheistic society. And I often comment when invited to interfaith gatherings that the biggest faith or the biggest religion that exists in society is not represented at this table. You have a Christian minister or priest, and you have a Jewish rabbi, and you have a Muslim scholar, and you have people from other faiths gathered together. And they're talking about the differences between their religions. And it's somewhat silly because the majority of the people out there don't believe in God. And amongst the people who are atheists out there, there are a few people who are courageous enough and who are sincere enough to admit the fact that they don't believe in God openly and say that they're atheists. Whereas a vast majority of people, they identify with some religion or another for cultural reasons or for social reasons or for superstitious, for reasons based on superstition. But they really functionally don't believe in any God either. And this is unfortunately a quality that also is there, although to a far lesser degree and a far lesser proportion. It's a quality that's there in Muslim societies as well. And such people are referred to as, in the Quran, in the Quranic discourse and discourse of the Sirah of the Prophet ﷺ, they're referred to as munafiqeen. They're referred to as munafiqeen. It's important when you think about atheism to understand what comes part and parcel with atheism, right? Atheism, the word atheism is a very interesting word. It's a hokey word, right? Arabic is a wonderful language in the sense that in Arabic language, you have a word for everything. What does atheism mean? The A means not, and the The means God, and the ism is a suffix that indicates that this is an abstract noun. So the concept of having no God. In Arabic, right, there's ilhad. There's a word for atheism. You don't have to say it's not theism, but there's actually a separate word for it. In English, you say atheism, right, meaning the concept of having no God. When you have the concept of having no God, the question comes up, then what do you have? What do you have as a concept? And the answer to that in a majority of cases, and the answer to that in the predominant case that we see both in North America and around the world, and the answer to that both in this age and in the age of the ancient people, was that atheists were people who don't believe in a higher power, Rather, they believe in the dunya. They're materialists. They're materialists. They believe in a materialist philosophy, right? We don't believe in Allah. We believe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wal-'iyadhu billah, may Allah ta'ala be our protection. But they say we believe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a fiction and a fairy tale. But what we can see and what we can touch and what we can grasp in this material world, we believe this is true and this is the ultimate reality. And this is what we put our iman in. This is what we put our faith in. This is what we give total value to. And because of that, we reject anything that we cannot see and we cannot touch. We reject the world of the unseen. So atheism is a sifa of materialism. It's an attribute of materialism. The actual thing that they worship is what? Is material. The actual thing that they worship is material, and atheism is an attribute of that materialism. That while worshiping material, they also don't acknowledge that there is any God, there's any transcendent higher power that orders things and that runs things in the universe. This is important to understand. This is not a new philosophy. This is not a new philosophy. The idea that what you see is what you get in the material world, there's no reality after that. People in modernity, people who live nowadays, they make the same mistakes that the people in the past made, but they have another layer of ignorance, and that's based on what? Takabbur. It's based on arrogance, that we think just because we have iPhones, we think just because we use the internet, just because you have an iPad, just because you have a Twitter account, just because you have a Facebook account, somehow we're special and we're different and we're better than people who lived in a different age. This is ridiculous, it's silly. The atheism that the people have nowadays is the same atheism that people had centuries ago. It was the same atheism that the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam had to deal with. Because even the mushrikeen of Quraysh, some of them were very dutiful to their idols, but a lot of them also knew that this idol worship is kind of nonsense. It's a cultural thing that we have. As long as these idols, we let all of them into the Kaaba, people will come from all parts of the Arabian Peninsula and further than that, and they'll bring their goods and services to Makkah Mukarramah, and we'll buy, sell, and trade. We'll become rich. We'll have status. All of the Arabs will believe that we are somehow the holy people, the Ahlullah, and that we have some sort of special status among people. And they resented the Prophet ﷺ's da'wah. Why? Because his da'wah, it's not that they cared about the idols. A lot of them, it's not like they cared about the idols, but they resented the da'wah of the Prophet ﷺ. Why? Because it would have been bad for business. And the arguments they used to give to the Nabi ﷺ when he would present them with the Quran, and literally the arguments that they would give to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself, were arguments of atheism. It wasn't arguments of why Lat and Uzza are powerful and are co-equal in status to Allah, but rather they're arguments of why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't exist. أَوَلَمْ يَرَى الْإِنسَانُ أَنَّا خَلَقْنَاهُ مِن نُطْفَةٍ فَإِذَا هُوَ خَصِيمٌ مُبِينٌ. So does not the person see that we created him from a clot of blood, but still he becomes a khasim, he becomes like a contestant and a person who has an argument, and a person who has a beef with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like he's trying to compete with Allah ta'ala, like a competitor with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning that we exist, you don't exist, right? فَإِذَا هُوَ خَصِيمٌ مُبِينٌ وَضَرَبَ لَنَا مَثَلًا وَنَسِيَ خَلْقَهُ قَالَ مَنْ يُحْيِي الْعِظَامَ وَهِيَ رَمِيمٌ. He says that he gives parables to us, and he forgets the fact that he was created by something or another. And he says, who's going to bring life to these bones after they crumble? When they crumble, they become dust. And who here has seen the bones crumble to dust? Nobody. You don't really see dead things a lot in American society, mashallah. North America, you don't see a lot of dead stuff around. The dead things that you see is usually in the plate in front of you. And HMA does a good job to make sure that even that is, mashallah, relatively nice for dead standards. It's a relatively nice thing that you see in front. You don't ever see like the crumbled bones. When I used to live in Mauritania, I used to study in Mauritania in the Badia, in the open desert, you'll see that. So it's like really hot outside and there's not a whole lot of water. So a donkey or a camel would die by the side of the road. What are you going to do? Pick up like a several 100-kilogram camel and move it or bury it? No, you just leave it on the side. So it will decay, and you'll see rotting flesh, or you'll see one that the flesh is all gone and it says hair and bones. You'll see one that's just bones left. And then you'll see even the bones are in relative states of decay. And then after a while, you'll notice by the side of the road, there'll be a color of light-colored sand on top of like red sand or yellow sand. And you'll know that this is the dust of the leftovers of some dead animal. Right? So that's what literally the mushrikeen, right? The mustahzi'in, they would take bones of decrepit and decayed carcasses and smash them in front of the Prophet ﷺ and say, who's going to bring this back to life? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He indulges the atheists. In order to benefit from the Quran, you don't have to believe that it's written by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You don't have to believe it's the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah ta'ala actually gives rational arguments, because we're Muslims, so whatever is in the Quran, if we believe it's written by Allah, we accept it. Why? Because Allah said it. But even if you don't believe Allah says it, there's arguments that appeal to the rationality, because how is somebody supposed to submit to Allah Ta'ala if they don't know that this book is from Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, or they don't know that Allah Ta'ala exists? So Allah Ta'ala presents rational arguments for His existence. So He says, He says, مَنْ يُحِي الْعِظَامَ وَهِيَ رَمِيمٌ قُلْ say يُحْيِيهَا الَّذِي أَنْشَأَهَا أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ وَهُوَ بِكُلِّ خَلْقٍ عَلِيمٌ. Say to the people that the one who will bring it back to life is the one who gave it life in the first place. وَهُوَ بِكُلِّ خَلْقٍ عَلِيمٌ. This is an extremely rational argument. This is not an argument that requires that you believe that the Quran is the book of Allah or the word of Allah. This is not an argument that requires that you believe that the Prophet ﷺ is a messenger of Allah. This is not an argument that requires you to study in madrasa or put on a turban or go for 30 days or 40 days or any other amount of days and any other effort, good or bad or otherwise. This doesn't require any of these things. Anyone who has 2 bits of a brain will be able to understand that. And aslan, the argument of the people who believe that the world is created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala against the materialist philosophers is a very sound argument. It's a very simple argument. This is an argument. There's an atheist, a very famous atheist he tried to debate with, Imam Abu Hanifah. Why is he Abu Hanifah? He didn't have a daughter named Hanifa. Maulana Bilal in Chicago, he has a daughter named Hanifa. He's Abu Hanifah for that reason. Right? Imam Abu Hanifah, the Imam that gave us the fiqh and the aqidah, etc., which is from Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but he formalized it, he systematized it, and he had it committed down to writing. Because he used to argue and he used to uphold the aqaid of the Ahl Sunnah in front of the people of batil, of spurious and vain beliefs. One time he was going to, and where's Shaykh Zahir is not here right now, Zahir, he's not here right now, but I heard it from one of his bands. I also read it, but I remember he gave it in a very dramatic fashion in one of his talks. He said that an atheist, a famous atheist, in front of the Khalifa, right? Because the Muslims were relatively open-minded people. They would not just shut up their opposition. Rather, they would let them have their day and plead their case, and they would argue with them based on rational proofs rather than based on force. The Khalifa of their time, in front of him, an atheist was boasting. I believe it's Abu Ja'far al-Mansur. He was boasting in front of Abu Ja'far al-Mansur that there is no Muslim who can prove that God exists. There's no Muslim who can prove that God exists. I can shut any Muslim down in debate. And so the Muslims said, oh, we need somebody who, to shut this guy up, because he's really making a fitna amongst the people and he's becoming very arrogant, right? Well, Islamu ya'lu wa la yu'la alayhi. Islam is on top. There's nothing else comes on top of Islam. So they had ghaira for Islam. They had ghaira. They used to guard Islam with their pride and with their honor. So they said, we're going to call up, Imam Abu Hanifah will shut this guy up. So Imam Abu Hanifah agrees to the debate. They set the time and the place of the debate. Many of you may have heard this story before, so I'll try to make it quick. And so what happens is the debate, the time and place comes, the Khalifa is there, his whole court is there, the atheist debater is there, Imam Abu Hanifah is not there. As time goes by, minutes, half an hour, hours, a lot of time goes by. And finally Imam Abu Hanifah comes in, as if he's in a rush, huffing and puffing. He comes into the majlis, and the atheist debater is upset that you're so late. He said, what, Shaykh Zahir, he said, he dramatized. He said, what kind of Muslim are you that you're so late? And Shaykh Zahir speculated, perhaps he should have said, I'm a Pakistani Muslim or I'm an Indian Muslim. That's why we're so late. That's not part of Islam. Anyway, it was a kind of a funny thing he said. He said, you're late. Why are you so late? He said, it's very interesting that you ask why I'm so late. I had to cross the river to come to the Caliph Palace, and I couldn't find a boat or I couldn't find a raft or anything to take me across. And so I was at a loss. How am I supposed to get across? I can't just get into the river and swim. And so while I'm waiting, right, all these hours and whatever have gone by, something amazing happened. Well, something very amazing happened. I saw trees, they fell down and they separated themselves into planks, and those planks flew together, and pegs and tar and all these things, they all flew together, and it turned into the shape of a ship. And I walked over and walked onto the ship, and the ship took me across on its own. to the other side of the river, and that's why, alhamdulillah, I'm able to show up to this debate. So the atheist says, this is nonsense, this is baloney, what is this? What kind of, you're making stuff? First, it's offensive enough that you're late, and now you tell this silly story, what is this? How stupid do you think I am? So Imam Abu Hanifah says, if you cannot even believe a ship comes together on its own without someone having to make it, then how can you believe this entire dunya and all of its stars and the sun and the moon and all of these animals and all of these? How do you believe it? It's even sillier that you would think that all of this stuff happens on its own without anyone making it. That's reason, that's rationality, that's checkmate. Khalas, that's the debate is over. Debate is over at this point. So this is something, right? This is something that the people say, well, you can't prove God exists. حاجة كل مخلوق لصانع. Everything that's created in the universe has to have someone or another to make it. We live in a world of causes and effects, right? Everything that's makhluk, everything that's created has to have some cause in order to bring it into reality. The only thing that has no cause to bring it into reality is the thing that has a wujud mustaqil, it has its own existence. And that's what we say about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That Allah ta'ala is different than His creation in the sense that He has His own existence, which is greater than time, it's greater than space. Time and space are creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we as human beings are not able to perceive that realm that's greater than time and space. But what we are able to perceive, which is in the realm of time and space, from among all of those things, we know that everything that happens has to have some cause in order for that effect to be made. Now, the materialist philosophers believe nothing created the universe. The universe, they existed forever and it will exist forever. From the ancient times, they're saying all of these things, right? From the ancient times, it's not something modern just because people have science and technology and iPhones and Twitters and blah, 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 and university and I'm a professor of this, that, and I discovered E equals MC squared and all of these things. This is not something new that these people came up with. These people are saying this from ancient times, right? When you go to university, or you may have some friend who's like from Muslim background, but he doesn't really believe in Islam anymore, a'udhu billah, or you may have some like non-Muslim friends and you try telling them about Sayyidina Ibrahim and the Prophet ﷺ and the Mi'raj and all these things, and they say, man, I don't believe any of that stuff. That's just a bunch of fairy tales. What does it say in the Quran? It says that وَإِذَا تُتْلَى عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتُنَا قَالُوا أَسَاطِيرُ الْأَوَّلِينَ. That when our verses are read to them, they say these are just the tales of the ancients. When was the Quran revealed? It's like 1400, like whatever number of years ago that the Quran was revealed. 1400 and some odd years ago, even for the purposes of 1400 years ago, the society that the Prophet ﷺ lived in was not even a high-tech society. It was like a Stone Age society. They didn't even know how to build buildings. We talked about that. Yes, they didn't even know how to make like normal buildings. I mean, they were just living a Stone Age life. They were even considered backwards for the standards of the time that they lived in. If you look at the great buildings and whatever that the Romans made and that the Persians made, right? The Persians, their palaces, some of them are still standing, right? The Prophet ﷺ's original masjid is not standing. There's even the Kaaba itself, it's been destroyed and rebuilt many times. The maqsood of the Kaaba, the barakah is in the place. It's not in the actual like bricks. Although anything that's connected with that, obviously we revere it. But the bricks are not like from the time of Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, right? The Romans, their buildings are still standing. If you go to Turkey, right, the Hagia Sophia, it's a beautiful building. It was originally built as a church, and when Sultan Muhammad Fatih, right, according to the prediction of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam, when the Muslims conquered that city, the Sultan Muhammad Fatih, about which the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said it was, what a wonderful army and what a wonderful commander that they'll have. That Sultan Muhammad Fatih, that righteous king, when he conquered Constantinople, when he conquered Istanbul, he turned that church into a masjid. And that church is still standing. It was built before before the time of Islam, and it's still standing, and it's still solid. Like earthquakes have come and gone, nothing, right? The buildings of those people are still there. Those people had some technology. The people in Makkah Mukarramah, Abu Jahals and Abu Lahabs and these people had no technology, but still, what did they say? Well, we're not going to believe in your religion. It's a bunch of hocus pocus. These are just the tales of the ancients. Now, you have to resolve a couple of issues here. Right? So, first of all, what you need to understand is the arguments that the people, atheists, they bring nowadays, they're not new arguments. The argument for atheism and the arguments of atheism are not new arguments. Nothing has changed in modernity that wasn't true back so many years ago. And the people who became Muslim were smart people. They were the smart people of their time. Technology may have developed since then, but the human genome and the human brain and things like that, they're essentially the same as they were then. And people knew how to think about things, and they knew how to think about issues. Those people, the reason that our forefathers, spiritually and for most of us, physically, the reason that they rejected atheism in that time and accepted Islam is because it made more sense. Because it made more sense. Even these kind of backwards people, they will give the same excuse that the high-tech people will give. They'll say that religion is the tale of the ancients. But when you bring it down to a logical level, you know that this entire universe cannot come together on its own without some force bringing it into nature. Right? And as ordered and as highly ordered and as sophisticated as the order of the universe is, the one who created it has to be even more highly ordered and even more sophisticated than that creation itself. Then the question comes, okay, why would someone be so stupid as to think that all of this stuff is going to happen on its own? Why would their heart go toward the idea of the universe, the material world having existed on its own forever, rather than believing in Allah? Which is something that makes more sense logically, and it's something that the heart is also more comfortable with. The reason for this is something that the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he gave us insight about. And that is that he says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created every person with a qadr, with a fate. Some people will be shaqi and some people will be sa'id. Some people, they're destined by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for wretchedness. Right? Allah ta'ala wrote that these people will be wretched, and some people Allah ta'ala destined them for happiness in the hereafter when they meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a reality. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the world. He wrote it for His creation. It's not something that we have a chance to argue about, nor is it something we want to argue about. Rather, we accept His decree, and we ask Allah ta'ala from His karam and His mercy that He make all of us from the people of happiness and not from the people of wretchedness. But the heart will always incline, and this is something you don't even need to be a Muslim to understand. The heart will always incline to the thing that it loves more. So the hearts that love Allah Ta'ala will be inclined toward Allah Subhanahu Wa Ta'ala, and the hearts that love the dunya will be inclined toward the dunya. So if all you do is collect silver and gold, if all you do is build buildings and talk about cars and talk about different currencies and their exchange rate and the stock market and the whatever different type of accessories and jewelry and different types of clothes and different types of whatever material things are in the world, if the only thing that impresses you is diamonds and rubies and the only thing that impresses you is material things, then your heart will have a connection with those material things, and it will be like a lens through which you see the world. Just like if a person has glasses on and they're tinted blue, then they'll see everything as blue. So the dunya becomes the lens through which they see the entire world, and the dunya becomes all that they see, and they become blind to anything else other than that. And you and I both know about it. I don't know, anyone here watch the NBA? Really into the NBA? Anyone? No one? Canadians don't do basketball? Okay, mashallah, some guys up here in the front. There's a player, I think he plays for the Milwaukee Bucks now. He used to be in the Sonics. His name is Luke Ridnour. He's a really interesting guy in the sense that, the NBA players, they're all like these really big, tough, built-looking guys. And this guy's kind of like a skinny and small white guy from Blaine, Washington, where I went to high school. He was actually 1 year younger than me. He's a really nice guy. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give him hidayah. I always found him to be a very nice person, mashallah, in high school. And I knew him and I grew up with him. One of the things that people don't understand, right? Because we used to make fun of him. We say, you think you're going to make it to the NBA? You're never going to make it to the NBA. You should go and go to math class or something like that, because this is not going to happen. It's a pipe dream. Guess what? He made it to the NBA. Mashallah for him, Ever since I moved to Blaine from California, which was when I was in the 5th grade, he was in the 4th grade, I don't ever recall seeing him except for he had a basketball in his hand. I don't ever recall seeing him except for he had a basketball in his hand. He used to live, breathe. His father was the basketball coach for the school team, and it was a relatively small school. And he used to just live, breathe, eat basketball. Other people would be doing other things. Other people would be having girlfriends. Other people would be studying. Other people would be having fun. Other people would be, experimenting with drugs. Other people would be doing other things, good and bad. Everything they would be doing. This guy, all he's doing is basketball. His whole world, his whole universe is basketball to him. Now, a person who is like that, obviously, his ta'alluq is going to be with basketball, right? وَمَنْ يُرِدْ ثَوَابَ الدُّنْيَا نُؤْتِهِ مِنْهَا. Allah Ta'ala even himself says, whoever wants the rewards and the pleasures and the treasures of this world, we'll give him whatever he wants. We'll give him وَسَنَجْزِ الشَّاكِرِينَ. But the people who have shukr, the people who are thankful to Allah Ta'ala, will reward them. And that's another thing. You're not going to learn that, unfortunately, from Luke Ridnour yet. But the thing is that this individual, he has this ta'alluq with basketball. So all he lives, dreams, and eats, sleeps, and thinks is basketball. And so if you tell him about something, tell him, oh man, I saw so-and-so like a car accident happening. What is it? It's going to remind him of maybe shooting a ball and hitting the rim and bouncing off, right? Why? Because all he thinks about is basketball. You understand what I'm saying? People, if their heart is so attached to something, that will be the lens, right? That through which they'll see the world, and that will taint or paint the entire picture of the world and the universe that they see. A person who loves the dunya, and we talked about this yesterday at the tail end of the lecture, that we live in such an age that people, their hearts are so muta'alliq, even the Muslims, even the ulama, even the imams that have turbans and beards, they love the dunya so much and they're so like engrossed in the dunya, right? What about the average Muslim? What about the irreligious Muslim? The Muslims themselves are so engrossed in the dunya, right? The Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says, I don't fear for you these other fitan, I fear for you the dunya. That you guys will become so in love with the dunya and you will compete with each other in gathering the dunya, just like the people before you competed with each other for gathering the dunya. These people are so attached to the dunya that the dunya becomes their God for them. It becomes the thing that they understand. It becomes the thing they're comfortable with. They will be able to picture a universe in which the dunya existed forever, no one created it, despite the fact that this is an idea which is patently illogical. It's an idea that is patently illogical. It's something that doesn't require a whole lot of explanation to understand why it doesn't make sense. So this is why in the deen we have a commandment of not attaching ourselves to the dunya, and we have the commandment of making dhikr, right? To make dhikr. فَذَكِّرْ إِن نَفَعَتِ الذِّكْرَى, right? Remind. Why? Because the reminder is beneficial. سَيَذَّكَّرُ مَن يَخْشَى. And the one who fears Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that person will engross himself in this remembrance. وَسَيُجَنَّبُهَا الْأَشْقَى. And the wretched person will stay away from this remembrance. الَّذِي يَصْلَى النَّارَ الْكُبْرَى. The one for whom the greatest of fires will be set alight. ثُمَّ لَا يَمُوتُ فِيهَا وَلَا يَحْيَى. And he will not die in that fire, but nor will he quite be alive in it. It will be such a terrible thing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be our protection from it. But that's why we remind each other about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because fine, the argument, the logical argument made sense to you. Or maybe you heard another speaker in this speech, and they said something which made your iman go up. MashaAllah. But that kayfiyah, that hal, that condition doesn't last forever. And so we have the commandment that we should remind ourselves and keep making dhikr of ourselves. The idea is that if you keep reminding yourself again and again, then the effect of that stays with you. The effect of that stays with you. Because the heart and the mind are two very different things. The heart and the mind are two very different things, and the atheism of the heart and the atheism of the mind are two very different things. The atheism of the mind is based on a logical fallacy, it's an inability to understand logic. Right? The atheism of the heart is not based, because the heart doesn't deal in logic and in rationality. Rather, the heart deals in things that it's connected to. It falls in love with things. It deals with love. It deals with its connection with things. And so if the heart loves the dunya, then the heart is atheist. If the heart falls in love with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it's a Muslim heart. So the atheism of both of them, and then usually they go hand in hand, right? And sometimes they don't, and it causes people to explore and confuse and think about things, but usually what will happen is that they cannot stay separate for too long. They'll usually come together. The reason they would believe and know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is because their iman literally becomes an iman in the dunya. That they love the dunya so much that their iman becomes an iman in the dunya. This is one of the reasons that no Nabi alayhi salam ever came except for he taught his people zuhud. And why our Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum zuhud. And that every one of the righteous people, whether they are rich or poor, every one of them is a zahid. What does zuhud mean? It means asceticism. It means living your life with less. Living your life without taking as much as everybody else takes, and living your life in a way that you take less than you're able to take, and taking less and less and less and less from the dunya. From the dunya. What's the idea? That fine, we already cleared the intellectual, the debate about atheism in the mind away by explaining that it's a patently irrational and illogical philosophy. But now let's deal with the atheism of the heart. That the heart will naturally incline toward the thing that it spends time with, and the thing that it's conditioned to love. And so if you fill the heart with the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, obviously the heart will love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Ala bi dhikrillahi tatma'innul qulub. The qulub were made, they were created that they find peace and solace in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is one of the reasons I I find it's ajab al-ajaib, it's the most wondrous thing, that anyone you remind them about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they become happy. Anyone you remind them about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they become happy. Even a Christian and a Jew, they become happy. I've gone to interfaith talks before. There have been some crack Protestant, like Baptist, like really hardcore evangelical Christians. If you give them a bayan about the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you look how their eyes open up and you look how their ears open up, because everybody, Allah Ta'ala created every heart to love Him, and Allah Ta'ala created the people to love Him, that if someone tells about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wahdahu, alone and without any partner, everybody loves it, even if they accept Islam or if they don't accept Islam. Even atheists love to hear about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Isn't that strange? I used to have so many friends in university. We would tell them about the deen and we would make da'wah to them, and they would say, man, that's really awesome. You know, I really wish I could believe like you believe. What does that mean? I mean, has anyone else here had this experience before, that you give da'wah, I really wish I could believe like you believe. I just can't. There's two sides to that coin. One is the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, such that some people will not have the tawfiq of entering this deen. And this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His choice, that He allows in who He wills, and He allows into His rahmah who He wills, and He excludes who He wills. Just like a shepherd has two sheep, you know? Because a kafir will say, well, that's not even fair. No, it is fair. Why? Like a shepherd has two sheep, and he slaughters one of them and eats it, and then the other one he lets it graze in the pasture. Are you going to call the police? You call the Toronto Police, Scarborough Police Department, say, man, this guy, book him, he slaughtered one of his sheep. The guy is going to be, you're crazy, man, you're out of your mind, stop wasting our time. It's his sheep, he can do whatever he wants with it, he owns it. Allah Ta'ala created the heavens and the earth, He can do whatever He wants with anybody. There's nobody who's going to call the police or call a judge or file a lawsuit against him. He is the judge. He's al-Malik al-Dayyan. He's the king and He's the judge. There's nobody else who's going to judge after that. But the atheist, still the heart, he still has a heart. And when we're talking about spiritual heart, the physical heart pumps blood. We're talking about the spiritual heart, right? He still has a heart inside of him, inside of his jof, inside of his cavity. And so that heart still loves Allah Ta'ala, and still, but it's not going to get tawfiq of entering to the deen. But you'll still see, even an atheist, you'll see that love of Allah Ta'ala. Even if an atheist, if you see him and he gets startled or he thinks he's going to lose his life, he says, oh God. That's all of them say that. All of them say that. Why? Where does that come from? It's because they know and we know. But we're commanded also that we should have our heart filled with the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because if the heart has the dhikr of anything else other than Allah, because there's Allah the Khaliq and everything else is the makhluk, right? Allah the creator and everything else is created. It's all material. It's all material. So if you have Allah Ta'ala in your heart, then there's no room for anything else in your heart except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the murad of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he mentions the state of ihsan in the hadith, what is famously known as the hadith Jibreel, the first hadith of Sahih Muslim, أَن تَعْبُدَ اللَّهَ كَأَنَّكَ تَرَاهُ فَإِن لَمْ تَكُنْ تَرَاهُ فَإِنَّهُ يَرَاكَ. That you should worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is farther on every person to get to the state, or at least die trying to get to the state, that you worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as if you see Him. And at least if you cannot see Him, then at least know that He sees you. This is the heart that has no one other than Allah and nothing other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because if you have Allah in your heart, there's no room for anything else other than Him. This is what the whole dhikr is that you're pushing out all of this other stuff from the heart that aslan doesn't belong in it. It can be in your hand, but it doesn't belong in your heart. And people who have something else in their heart, why do they incline toward atheism? Because everything else is makhluk, everything else is created. Everything else is created, everything else is material. And what did we say? Atheism is not a belief in and of itself. Either it's an attribute of another belief, which is what? Materialism. Right? And if your heart is filled with material, then the heart is such a strange and interesting thing. Subhanallah al-Azim. We always give so much credit to the brain, and the brain deserves a lot of credit. But we don't ever give credit to the heart. That the heart is the thing that can take a person's brain and turn it upside down and still cause a person to do something that even the brain knows is not a good idea. Right? That's why when we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? الْيَوْمَ لَا يَنْفَعُ مَالٌ وَلَا بَنُونَ إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. Right? It says on Yawm al-Qiyamah, this is going to be a day that a person's wealth and their sons and all these things are not going to be able to benefit them. No one will benefit except for someone who comes with a good brain. No, except for a person who comes with qalb salim. It doesn't say like dimagh salim. It says qalb salim, the person who comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with a straight heart. Because the heart has the ability the heart is the master and the brain is the servant. The heart is the master, as the brain is the servant. The heart, you know, like we had Shaykh Bilal Mullah was talking about, you know, this guy, these people are people who are, you know, mustabsirin. They're people of good opinion of, really, they're really like smart people, but then they're worshipping idols and whatnot. Why? Because the heart is attached to the idols. The heart is attached to the deen of their forefathers and whatever. And so the heart will use its servant, which is the brain, in order to justify all this nonsense that it wants to do. But the heart is muta'alliq with something, it will trump the brain. This is why Mufti Taqi, he's always, I see in many bayans, he's fond of quoting verses from Allama Iqbal, and you have to forgive me, my Urdu is not, you know, super awesome, but he's often fond of quoting a line, Allama Iqbal, Subh azal ye mujhse kaha Jibra'il ne jo aqal ka ghulam ho wo dil na kar qabul. That on the dawn of, the primordial dawn of creation, the angel Gabriel came to me and said, that person who is the slave of rationality, that person who's the slave of rationality, that heart won't be accepted. Why? Because the heart is the boss, right? If you make yourself a slave to rationality, it's like the car trying to drive a person, right? It's like, have you ever seen a person riding a donkey? Yeah. Have you ever seen a donkey riding a person? How ridiculous would that be? How stupid would that be, right? And so what happens is the atheism of and this is a good segue too. Inshallah, the last, we're done at 6:25. 6:20, so this is good, mashallah. The last point I wanted to make, and that is the idea that somehow science you know, proves somehow that God doesn't exist, or somehow points toward the direction of atheism. I myself am not like a scientist. I have a bachelor's degree in biochemistry. But the reason I don't consider myself a scientist is I've not carried out any independent research on my own. But mashallah, we spent a lot of time. I took like higher math, multivariate calculus, differential equations, linear algebra, etc. I've taken calculus-based physics and chemistry, organic chemistry, physical chemistry. Anyone here taken general chemistry before? Anyone? No one? Raise your hand. It's okay. You're going to become a doctor. All the uncles will love you. You took chemistry, inshallah? Yeah. So you know, like all this PV equals nRT and all these kind of equations you learn. When you take PChem, you have to derive all of those equations, again, based on only math and physics. It's a headache. It's like the most difficult course of study difficult class that a person can take, an undergraduate course of study. So even though I don't consider myself a scientist in the sense that I haven't put out any unique research into the field, alhamdulillah, we spent a lot of time with science. Science is not something that answers the question of whether God exists or doesn't exist. In fact, true science is not actually asking that question or trying to answer that question. True science is trying to deal with other things, you know, make theories regarding the natural world based on observations of the natural world. It doesn't ask about something that's supernatural or something that's super rational. But what you will find is, as a cultural quirk, right? Just like there was a time when the best doctors in the world were all from the Muslim world. Right? And now, even though the Muslims have great doctors, that's not true. That's not true anymore. If you had a surgery that you had to have, like brain surgery, and you have a choice of two surgeons. One surgeon has done his specialization, you know, in New York, and the other one has done his specialization in Karachi. Even if you're from Karachi, you'll say, please, for God's sake, give me the New York one, man. Right? Why? It doesn't mean that medicine is somehow comes from New York City or whatever. It just means that nowadays, the predominant culture in medicine and the cutting edge research and all that, it belongs to the culture of the West. It's a fact. Nowadays, the predominant culture amongst scientists is a culture of materialism. And why shouldn't it be? It makes a lot of sense. These people are non-Muslims, right? These people are non-Muslims, and all they do is study the material world day and night. And unlike the Muslims who used to study the material world day and night, the scientists amongst them at least, they come from a religious background. Their aqidah makes no sense whatsoever. You have scientists like Galileo. He made the observation that the earth revolves around the sun, not the other way around. The church says, how can the earth revolve around the sun? The earth is where Jesus Christ came, and he's the Son of God, so the sun has to revolve around the earth. And so they excommunicated him. They put him in solitary confinement. They say they made a fatwa saying this guy's going to go to hell. Right? And so after some time, these things like this happened again and again and again. After some time, these scientists were like, wow, man, these church guys really don't know what they're talking about. And they read in the Bible that the Bible says that the earth is only 5,000 some odd years old. They say, of course the earth is not 5,000 some odd years. We have written historical records that are older than that. There's all of these things that just don't make sense, that they couldn't reconcile them, so they said, you know what, Deen, let it go. And we work on all the science day and night anyway. We study all these material things day and night anyway. So our heart's naturally inclined toward it. So we're going to take this as our new Deen, this atheism as our new Deen. The Muslims, on the other hand, had a solid aqidah. It's very simple. It doesn't require any holy mystery. Like the Trinity, they say it's a holy mystery. You'll never understand it. Tawheed is not a mystery. Tawheed is something any small child can understand. What is our aqidah? It's Qul huwa Allahu ahad, Allahu samad. They say Allah is one, Allah the eternal. Lam yalid wa lam yulad. He was not born, nor was he begotten, nor does he beget. Lam yalid, he doesn't beget, nor was he begotten. Wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. And there's no one like unto him. A kid will be like, I understand. Even a kid will be like, I understand. It doesn't require a technical specialist or whatever. It's not a mystery. They didn't have that privilege because their deen was something that was confusing and that the fitrah of a normal person cannot accept. They left it behind their backs. The Muslim scientists never had this problem, and Muslim scientists to this day don't ever have this problem. And two things, I wanted to leave with two things. Two scientific discoveries that have they're scientific discoveries or scientific theories that have shaken the world of religion. One is the theory of evolution. Now, Muslims oftentimes will have a problem with the theory of evolution despite the fact that they don't know what the theory of evolution is. And the reason they have a problem with the theory of evolution is because the Christians, they see they have a problem with the theory of evolution, and so they believe somehow that we also have the same problem. We don't have any problem with the theory of evolution. Say, Shaykh, astaghfirullah, how can you say man is descended from monkeys? That's not what the theory of evolution says. The theory of evolution is a theory based on two things: the independent assortment of genes and the idea of natural selection. That if there's like 100, what do you guys have here? You guys have moose, right? If there's 100 moose in Toronto and it's a really cold winter, then the moose that survives well in the winter, that one will survive and the other ones will die off, and then that one will have other offspring, and then the offspring that are really resistant to living in a cold winter, those are the ones will propagate on, and it will somehow, like the species changes slowly over time. Neither of these concepts, the idea of independent assortment of genes or natural selection, is in any way antithetical to our aqidah. And so we don't say that it's 100% true, because the only thing that we know 100% true is with yaqeen is what Allah and His Rasul told us. But, if it makes sense, we can go with it. We don't say it's 100% wrong either. It's just as long as it makes sense, we can go with it. And when it doesn't stop making sense, or if it stops making sense, then we abandon it. But there's nothing wrong with it. It has nothing to do with our belief. Now, why did this have an impact on religion? It's because Charles Darwin, the one who made this theory of evolution, which so far has we have no issue with it in our aqidah, he made he made a guess. He further made a theory that was on shaky grounds. It's just a guess that he made. He said, according to this model, it's quite possible that mankind evolved from apes, that apes slowly underwent changes, and those apes, changing over centuries and millennia and eons, turned into human beings. We believe that's wrong. There's no fossil, in the fossil record, there's no data that decisively indicates this is the case. We might believe that for every other animal. It was jaiz for us to believe that this is the process for every other animal, but we believe that insan is different. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created him with his hands. He blew his ruh into insan, and He sent him down on the earth. And this is not difficult to understand or believe. Why? Because show me another animal on this planet that is as battamiz as insan, or as good as insan. When you're talking about Muhammad Shakir, as good as Muhammad Shakir or as bad as me, show me. There's no one who even competes with us in either end. There's obviously something different about us. Obviously, there's something different about us. So we don't believe mankind are evolved from apes. As for the rest of the theory of evolution, there's nothing wrong with it. We don't have a problem with it. He said mankind evolved from apes, and he further said that, look, how the universe changes slowly on its own. It changes on its own, and it just adapts. This means that, look, the universe doesn't require any driving force to change it. Rather, it will keep changing on its own naturally in a way that makes sense. Right? You remember we were talking about materialism? That they took this as a hujjah, or a proof in favor of materialism, that the universe doesn't need any external force to change it. Rather, it keeps changing in a natural way on its own. This was a very big victory for the materialist philosophers. They held this up as a victory. This victory was absolutely stomped into the ground by another major discovery that they made later on, which was what? that the universe actually there was something they call the Big Bang, right? That there was nothing, and then bam, the whole universe exists. Now, did it exist forever? No, we actually know that, and we take that to be a scientific fact, that the universe didn't exist forever. There was something that caused it to come into existence. And they postulate, just like that, there's something that will cause it to go out of existence. What is that something? Let's name that something Allah. Let's name that something Allah. Now, what you believe about Allah and what we believe about Allah is the topic of another discussion. It's a topic of another talk. But we've come to the point that there was something or another that did something or another that caused all of this stuff to come into existence and to come into creation in a very logical way. And so the point is that science doesn't, in and of itself, talk about religion. It doesn't prove or disprove religion, even though its discoveries have impacts on the philosophy of the time. But the science that we have in front of us, in fact, reinforces the idea that there was some sort of external event, external to the material world, that's greater than the material world, that caused it to come into existence. And this external force is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what we know about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we can inshallah save for a later talk. But at least we can say with our hearts, we can say that our mind went through the motions and went through the logical steps. And we say to the heart, listen heart, I know you love gold and silver and nice cars and a big house, but this material world, it didn't exist forever and it doesn't exist forever. The one that created it is the one that we're going to worship and the one that we're going to throw our lot in with. And that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq of having Allah ta'ala in our minds, on our minds and in our hearts. Wa sallallahu tabaraka wa ta'ala wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam ajma'in.